Aunt, I need a study room.
The word aunt made me shiver involuntarily. So, I had reached the age where people called me aunt. I looked up and saw a girl with delicate makeup and fair skin standing in front of me.
How many hours do you need? And your name, please?
Emily, for the whole night.
I registered her name in the system and handed her a card.
You must be a student from the nearby university. It's exam season, so the study rooms are quite full.
Emily didn't respond to my comment. She took the card and left.
This kid, so impolite.
I sat down and continued reading my book. This was the second year I had been running this study room. Business was good as the end of the semester approached, and most of the rooms were occupied.
Aunt, I want a room by the window. Are there any left?
The girl who was whining at me was Sarah, a student from the nearby university. Sarah was a regular at the study room, and we got along quite well. She had a very likable personality.
There really aren't any left. The last ones were all booked. If there were any, I would definitely give one to you.
Sarah took the registration book and looked at the entries.
Emily? She came to the study room too?
Emily? You know her?
She's the belle of our civil engineering department. I thought she didn't care about the final exams. I didn't expect her to sneak into the study room.
Sarah sneered and handed the registration book back to me, opting for a room without a bed. At 10 o'clock in the evening, Emily came out of her room to buy 2 cans of instant noodles.
How much?
$10.
Just like before, Emily paid and left, very coldly. I didn't have a good impression of this girl.
Maggie, I'm here. You should go rest.
Being over 40, I didn't have much energy, so I hired a part-timer to cover the night shifts for me. There was a bar near the study room, and it was still very lively even after 11 o'clock. Walking through the drunken crowd, I couldn't help but cover my nose. The smell of alcohol was overwhelming. I looked up and saw a striking girl in the crowd. Wasn't that Emily? Why was she dressed like that and walking with several men? A good university student, and she was working as a hostess?
Why aren't you focusing on your studies? You have a bright future ahead of you. Don't ruin it.
Emily, who had been drinking, looked at me drunkenly.
Who are you? Do I know you?
You don't need to know who I am. Do your parents know what you're doing? If they knew, how heartbroken would they be?
Emily looked me up and down with a disdainful expression.
Lady, are you going through menopause? Why do you like to meddle in other people's business so much?
She reached out and poked my shoulder with her finger.
Mind your own business. What I do has nothing to do with you.
With that, Emily linked arms with one of the men and walked away in her high heels. Watching her back, I shook my head. Another girl not taking care of herself, this would ruin her life. After that, Emily came to the study room a few more times, still very cold, as if she didn't know me. I didn't greet her again. I didn't like this girl. For a while after that, Emily didn't show up. I gradually forgot about her. The final exam week passed, the students went on vacation, and business at my study room slowed down. I saw her again one late night when my part-time help had taken the night off, and I was watching the store. There wasn't much business, so I had turned off most of the lights, leaving only one on at the front desk.
Aunt, can you help me?
I was stunned for a moment, fumbling to help her sit down and poured her a cup of hot tea.
Aunt, can you help me?
She kept repeating the question, but I had no idea what had happened to her.
What do you need help with?
Emily slowly raised her head, her hand resting on her lower abdomen, looking very anxious.
Are you expecting?
Emily, having her secret revealed, grabbed my hand.
I can't have this baby now. I'm only 23. If people find out, my life will be over. Aunt, please help me.
Her helplessness reminded me of my past self. Back then, I tried everything to conceive, but to no avail. When my in-laws blamed me, I felt just as helpless. I held her hand and decided to help her.
Don't be afraid. Come home with me first, and we'll figure out the rest later.
Emily didn't refuse, she had nowhere else to go. I settled her in the guest room at home and bought her some daily necessities.
My husband is usually not at home. You can stay here in peace, and we'll think about what to do next.
Emily knelt before me with a thud, crying her heart out.
Aunt, if my parents find out about this, they'll be furious. But I can't bear to part with this baby. Can you adopt my child?
Her words made me ponder deeply. I was over 40 and had never had a child. This was a sore point for us and subjected me to much criticism from my in-laws. If I had a child, even one without a blood relation, would it make my life more complete? I impulsively agreed, and Emily cried with gratitude. With a pregnant woman in the house, there were many more things to buy. I took Emily to a maternity store and bought a lot of items.
I've read that the first 3 months are critical for the baby's stability, and you need to be extra careful. Maybe you should take a break from school for a few months.
I hoped she could take a few months off, and once the baby was stable, she could resume her studies. Emily's expression showed she didn't want to take a break. She placed her hand on her belly.
Maggie, I've had a checkup, and the baby is doing well. I'll be very careful, and I can't afford to miss any part of my studies, so.
I didn't push her. She was willing to give me her baby so she could continue her education. Fortunately, Emily didn't have many classes now. When she wasn't in class, she would help me at the study room. Sarah was surprised to see Emily sitting at the front desk.
What are you doing here?
Emily stood in front of me, her eyes cold and defiant.
You don't need to know who I am. Do your parents know what you're doing? If they knew, how heartbroken would they be?
I tried to reason with her, but her response was cutting.
Lady, are you going through menopause? Why do you like to meddle in other people's business so much?
She reached out and poked my shoulder.
Mind your own business. What I do has nothing to do with you.
With that, Emily linked arms with one of the men and walked away in her high heels. Watching her back, I shook my head, feeling a pang of sadness for another girl not taking care of herself. After that, Emily came to the study room a few more times, still very cold, as if she didn't know me. I didn't greet her again. I didn't like this girl. A confrontation in the library ensues.
You don't need to know who I am. Do your parents know what you're doing? If they knew, how heartbroken would they be?
Lady, are you going through some crisis? Why do you like to meddle in other people's business so much?
Emily reached out and poked Maggie's shoulder.
Mind your own business. What I do has nothing to do with you.
Emily linked arms with one of the men and walked away in her high heels. Watching her back, Maggie shook her head.
Another girl not taking care of herself. This will ruin her life.
After that, Emily came to the study room a few more times, still very cold, as if she didn't know Maggie. Maggie didn't greet her again. She didn't like this girl. Emily and I stood face to face, the tension between us palpable.
You don't need to know who I am. Do your parents know what you're doing?
If they knew, how heartbroken would they be?
Emily looked me up and down with a disdainful expression.
Lady, are are you going through some midlife crisis? Why do you like to meddle in other people's business so much?
She reached out and poked my shoulder with her finger.
Mind your own business. What I do has nothing to do with you.
With that, Emily linked arms with one of the men and walked away in her high heels. Watching her back, I shook my head. Another girl not taking care of herself, this would ruin her life. After that, Emily came to the study room a few more times, still very cold, as if she didn't know me. I didn't greet her again. I didn't like this girl. The room fell silent as soon as Maggie spoke. Thomas's face changed, and he glared at her.
Jenny, stop talking nonsense.
It was clear that Thomas valued the child Emily was carrying. After all, over the years, he and his family had given Maggie plenty of cold looks because they didn't have a child. Now that he finally had one, he was determined to protect it. Unfortunately, he was being made a fool of.
Emily, you know Michael, right?
At the mention of Michael's name, Emily's face turned cold. Of course, she was afraid. The child she was carrying was Michael's.
He found me and told me a story. His girlfriend paid him $50,000 to sever his relationship with the child, then turned around and claimed a wealthy man as the father. Isn't that interesting?
Thomas realized that the story was about him and Emily. He let go of her hand and looked at her with scrutiny.
Emily, what's going on?
Emily tried hard to explain. She looked at Maggie, then grabbed Thomas's hand but didn't know what to say.
If you can't explain, let me do it for you.
Maggie took out the chat records Michael had given her and forwarded them to Thomas.
See for yourself.
Thomas took out his phone and looked through the pictures Maggie had sent. His face grew darker with each one.
Emily, you deceiver.
Thomas raised his hand to hit Emily, and she quickly backed away.
Thomas, let me explain. It's not what it seems.
Then what is it? Are you saying you didn't send these messages?
With the evidence in hand, Emily had no way to defend herself. Seeing Thomas's anger and shame, Maggie felt a sense of satisfaction.
Thomas, I've been your wife for decades, and I've never wronged you. Since you no longer care about this marriage, let's get a divorce.
Maggie had thought about divorce many years ago. Back then, she couldn't let go of her feelings for Thomas and hid the fact that he was infertile, prolonging their relationship. All of this led to his betrayal and deceit. It wasn't worth it.
No way, Jenny. I won't divorce you.
Maggie knew he had no feelings for her. He didn't want to divorce her because he couldn't bear to lose his reputation.
You cheated, so I have the right to ask for a divorce. If you don't agree, we can go to court.
Thomas yanked her up from the sofa and glared at her.
I'll say it again, we are not getting a divorce.
In all their years of marriage, Maggie had never gone against his wishes. Whatever he said, she complied. She had endured so much, and for what? He treated her like a fool, deceiving her while she played the role of a free nanny for his mistress for months. She couldn't endure it any longer. In a dimly lit alley, a confrontation begins between Maggie and Emily.
You don't need to know who I am. Do your parents know what you're doing? If they knew, how heartbroken would they be?
Lady, are you going through menopause? Why do you like to meddle in other people's business so much?
Emily reached out, poking Maggie's shoulder with her finger.
Mind your own business. What I do has nothing to do with you.
With that, Emily linked arms with one of the men and walked away in her high heels. Watching her back, Maggie shook her head.
Another girl not taking care of herself. This will ruin her life.
After that, Emily came to the study room a few more times, still very cold, as if she didn't know Maggie. Maggie didn't greet her again. She didn't like this girl. I resented Emily even more than Thomas. Her schemes had shattered the peaceful facade of my marriage. After Emily left, I reopened the study room and resumed business. Several peaceful days passed before Thomas disrupted my life once again.
Maggie, for the sake of our many years together, let's not get divorced, okay?
His gentleness reminded me of when we first met.
If only you had realized this sooner.
I promise you, nothing like this will ever happen again. Please forgive me this once, okay?
Just as I was hesitating, my phone rang. It was the hospital calling.
Are you a relative of Emily? Emily is in critical condition and might lose the baby. Please come to the hospital immediately.
Emily had listed my number as her emergency contact. I had Thomas drive me to the hospital. By the time we arrived, Emily had been moved to a regular ward. I found the doctor and inquired about her condition.
It was already critical when she arrived. The baby couldn't be saved, and due to damage to her uterus, it will be difficult for her to conceive in the future. For more details, you can ask the police who brought her in.
From the police, I learned that someone had called to report Emily fainting on the street, and they had brought her to the hospital. She lost the baby and, because of it, lost the ability to become a mother. I sat by her bedside until she woke up.
My baby!
The baby is gone. You won't be able to have children anymore.
For a moment, Emily seemed deeply shocked, but it was only for a moment. She quickly regained her composure.
Didn't you want this baby? Isn't it heartbreaking to never be able to have a child?
I sneered at her. She placed all a woman's worth on having children, which was pathetic.
Thomas has already hired a lawyer to sue you. All the money and things you took from him in the name of the baby must be returned. As for everything I did for you, I'll consider it voluntary and won't ask for it back.
Emily's face turned particularly interesting. She stared at me in disbelief.
Don't believe it? Your actions constitute fraud, and we have the most direct evidence. You will lose this case.
Emily leaned against the wall, looking helplessly ahead. Thomas valued this baby greatly and spent a lot of money on Emily and the baby. Now, asking Emily to return every penny was like a death sentence for her. Her reaction satisfied me. Those who do wrong should be punished. I stood up and left the ward with the demeanor of a victor. What awaited Emily was an incomplete life and a debt she could never repay. Emily's fate eventually gave me a sense of relief. When I got home, Thomas was waiting for me.
Are you okay?
I couldn't tell how much genuine affection Thomas had for me. In the end, I chose not to divorce him. Years of feelings made me soften. After deciding not to divorce, I sent Thomas's medical report to his mother. The news was a huge shock to her.
Is there really no way for Thomas?
I explained everything calmly. We've tried several times. Thomas can't have children. His mother forced me to undergo several treatments, causing me great distress. She covered her face with her hands and cried, immediately deciding to adopt a child. The next day, without Thomas's consent, I accompanied his mother to the orphanage. She quickly chose a 5-year-old boy with big, beautiful eyes. What's your name?
My name is Charlie.
Would you like to come home with me? I'll be your mom and take care of you, okay? Charlie nodded in agreement, longing for a home. Adoption procedures took 3 days, and then Charlie came home with me. Thomas had already been informed.
He's not biological. What's the use of bringing him home?
You can't have a biological one either. I ignored Thomas and took Charlie to his new room.
Mom, was that man my dad?
Yes, Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll live with Mom. Mom will protect you. Charlie stayed, and my dull days became much more interesting. I found a nearby kindergarten for him. Thomas still hadn't given up on sending Charlie back to the orphanage.
We should send him back.
No. If you want to stay married, Charlie stays. Charlie gradually adapted to his new life and became much more cheerful. Just as things were getting better, another girl appeared before me.
And can you help me? I'm in trouble.
The girl who suddenly appeared looked exactly like Emily.
What do you want me to help you with?
I'm still a college student. I can't raise this child. And can I have the baby here and then leave the child with you?
I had been through this scenario once before. Leaning back in my chair, I smiled at her.
How long have you been with my husband?
The girl was stunned by my sudden question but quickly regained her composure.
And what are you talking about? I don't even know your husband.
You're too young. My husband is not a good person. Not long ago, another girl came to me and said the same thing.
As I spoke, the girl's face grew increasingly pale.
But you're not a good person either. The child you're carrying isn't my husband's, is it? My husband has a condition, he can't have children.
With her lie exposed, the girl dropped her pretense and revealed a sinister smile.
No wonder. I was with him for over a month, and despite many encounters, I never got pregnant. So he can't have children.
Focus on your studies. Earn what you want through your own efforts. People like my husband are not reliable.
The girl left, and I didn't know how she would live the rest of her life, but it wasn't my concern. I closed the study room, went home, and packed up Charlie's and my belongings. We moved into a house I had bought earlier.